Very pleased to introduce Paul Harling for you. He's Gloucester's expert on the Cape Ann trolleys. All right.
That sounds fine to me, and I will answer any of your questions. I'll try to keep it short. That I get going and I'm hard to stop. We have the first thing in Gloucester's public transportation. This is the Lanesville stage, as it was finally identified. You have the Ennisquam stage here. They were owned by virtually the same company, same people. They were my wife's family. This one was worked out of Lanesville. It was then sold off. It ended up somewhere, I gather, down on Cape Cod, when the Boston and Maine Railroad acquired it as a display for the Concord Railroad Station in New Hampshire as the example of a Concord stage. It sat there on display until they ceased passenger service, and then the stagecoach, the property was sold to be turned into a shopping center, and the stagecoach, well, what do we do with it? Got a team of horses down, hitched it up, and took it up the hill to the State House, and it sat in the Capitol building for a number of, I guess, years, until they got tired of seeing it there, and they moved it over to the Historical Society, where it is today, in mint condition. It's a worthwhile story because it starts this whole business. It was shipped or packed up to be shipped out to the Railroad Fair in Chicago around 1950, and in the process of transportation they dinged it up a little bit, and so rather than send it damaged, they moved it to the Concord, New Hampshire shops of the Boston and Maine Railroad, where they underwent repairs, and it went out on display as it was planned. While it was sitting in the shop, the fellow, the painter, was looking at it. They have a skylight, or had several overhead, and the light happened to be streaming down on it in just a particular manner. And he looked at where it says Concord Coach. He looked on that, and he said, "There's something underneath it. I can see the lettering. It's been painted over, but you can still see it, but I can't read it." He said, "Can I have permission to clean it off?" "Go right ahead. You're going to paint it anyway." So he stripped it down, and underneath it, it said Lanesville P.O.
Oh my goodness.
Well, what's Lanesville P.O.? Post office, obviously. And they checked with the post office. They didn't know where there was a Lanesville. There's Lanesboro down south, and that, and we don't have any record of Lanesville P.O. Somebody said, "Wait a minute, how about a subdivision of a city?" "Oh, okay." Checked it. Gloucester, of course. And that is the Lanesville stagecoach, identified. I took a bunch of kids with me, and we went up to find it. And it had been moved from the State House to the Historical, and the Historical was closed. You could see it through the window. While we're looking through the window, a gal comes out on her way home. And she comes out, she says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, we came up from Gloucester to see the Lanesville stagecoach. It was owned by my wife's people." "Oh, come in." Opened it up. We went in, and she invited the kids, "Here, climb up into it." And she gave it a good swift kick and bounced it around. That's what it feels like when you're riding the stagecoach. I didn't get to ride it, but that's all right. That's it. And you have one right here, which is the sister to it. They were owned by the same family, and not necessarily exactly the same relatives, but it was in the family. But this operated to carry passengers up until 1830, when the streetcar made its arrival around Cape Ann. All right, now let's make this thing work. There we go. Okay, this is downtown Gloucester, and the double track It went to single behind the car, around the corner, went to a double track, and then through the Washington Street intersection, then went to single track, and it turned up the hill past the Legion building on the way around the Cape, or it went down to the boulevard, crossed the bridge to Essex and up to Beverly.
Paul, what year is that picture, would you say?
Probably 1910.
If you notice on the left where you see the word tickets on that building, it says cut rate railroad tickets to Boston. It was 60 cents each way, $1.20 round trip. It's now $9.50 one way. Shows you how much time it's gone.
That was Gray's Hardware for years, and now it's part of the savings bank. Okay, let's see, make this thing work properly. All right, this is the site of Grant Circle. The Babson House and the barn are still on location. The Ellery House, when they built 128, was packed up and moved behind the barn, facing Washington Street. The horse car, and that is, you can see the horse, the back end of the horse on it, that horse car is sitting in the middle of Grant Circle today.
Wow.
So that gives you a little timing of it. The horse cars actually ran as far as the mills in Riverdale when they finally decided to, they were in the process of electrifying, and once they went beyond the mills, it was all electric. The streetcars ran around the Cape. They had the main line branched through East Gloucester Square and out to Rocky Neck. There was a branch line from on Bass Avenue that went across the back of Good Harbor Beach on a half-mile trestle and went over to Long Beach where you could go for a swim. That line was used basically in the summertime. The steamers coming in from Boston would unload, everybody would pile up 2 or 3 open cars. I'll show you a picture of them. And they would go out for dinner and swim on the beach, and then they would come back and on the steamer and back to Boston. There were 2 steamers. There was the one from Boston to Gloucester and back to Boston. And there was one from Gloucester that went to Boston and came back to Gloucester at night. That was the freight boat, carried freight cargo and so forth. All right, let's make sure this thing works. Okay, this was one of the heavy blizzards. This is at the green, just above the rotary, and if you see through the tree, I'll point it out maybe, right here is the stack from the powerhouse, which was located in the shopping center which is now the shopping center there next to Grand Circle. But that was the big power plant for here. Unfortunately, it was not on a railroad connection. The power plant in Essex still exists, is backed up to the Essex branch and was served by the railroad. This powerhouse was served by a trolley coal car that came from Water Street in Beverly all the way down, and went in, dumped the coal, and went back and got another load, and that was its major route. But this apparently is around 1910, a heavy snowstorm, and of course all they did was plow the car tracks. They did not plow the road. There was no need to. Everybody with their sleigh, and you can see one here. And that may be the Lanesville coal pump. I'm not sure. It burned up in the barn when that burned here a few years ago. But we'll see more of that at a later point. Let's see. Okay, here's the crew with a snowplow, and they're out. And of course, if the plow got stalled, you got a crew out with shovels, and they shoveled the tracks. But they wanted to keep the track open as far as I could go. And there's a later picture of a snowplow on the curve going into Lanesville. And if you look at it, you will notice that this pole has been taken off of the car. If you had to leave a car because the power failed, it was your obligation to climb on top of the car and take the pole off and put it away so nobody would play with it when the power came back on again. All right, let's see what we got. Oh, this is terrible. Okay, that it's got a mind of its own. There we go. All right, now let's do that one. All right, there's the coal pump, and unfortunately that burned up in the barn fire in Lanesville here a few years ago. But the car tracks, that's all that's plowed. Notice the kid on the top of the snow pile. We had heavy winters, at least on occasions. The houses are exactly the same. This is opposite the hospital. And this is an open car at the Willows in Riverdale. Oh, come off it, machine. I got a heavy hand, I guess. All right, there's the Willows from the opposite end, and if you notice, right in the corner, there's car tracks. There was a passing track there where you could pass two cars. It was basically single track most of the way. From the railroad crossing on Washington Street around the Cape. It was single track with passing tracks. Various locations. Okay. Okay, here's a car. If you look carefully, you will recognize the Hutchins Mill and the causeway at Goose Cove. The building stands, the trolley doesn't. But I was told that one of the two women on the front seat of the car was the mother of my mother's best friend. I don't know. I wasn't there at that time. All right. This is the spillway at the Goose Cove dam, what have you, and a trolley passing overhead. And here's the classic. This is an open, four-wheel open car sitting in front of the buildings, and these buildings still stand. And to the rear left is the approach down to the Annisquam Bridge. And I knew the motorman, talked with him at great length. The others, I know that we know their names, but that's beside the point.
So that car right there is en route from Lanesville to Rocky Neck?
That's where she went. That was the main line. She came probably from the Foley Cove, or it could have come from Rockport, but it probably was Foley Cove.
That motorman is Ozzie Tucker. If you have heard that name, Ozzie Tucker was down at Clam Alley on the Mill River. He had a little house down there, and he lived as a hermit down there for a number of years in his later life until into his 80s, I believe.
They called him Clam Tucker because that's what he lived off of. But anyway, okay, this is at the same location. The approach to the wooden bridge is right there on the left, and this is a double truck car, and it's heading to Lanesville.
Well, wasn't that the trolley stop right there? That
Yes.
building which still stands and the sign
That is
is still
correct.
there today.
That is correct. That was called the Annisquam Station. But the turn was further on the straightaway. They've just put in a plumbing or something in the middle of that straightaway, just recently finished it, and that is on the site where the passing track used to be. So they had the schedule down very carefully that they would meet at these stops, the passing tracks, and could get by each other very successfully.
Paul, remind him that pole that has a white stripe on it next to the trolley car, that indicated a trolley stop.
That's right. That's your pole stop.
That was carried through to the Gloucester Autobus as well. The white stripe or the
Yep.
silver stripe on the pole,
Yep.
which was your bus stop.
And you can still see remnants of it in various places on some of the poles. And if you notice the location, you can realize that this was a reasonable place to stop because of the way the people were, houses were set up. All right, let's move on. This, I can't think of his name, but he's a typical motorman, and you'll notice the U.S. mail sign on the front of the car. It was carrying sack mail from Lanesville to the post office, which was down on Main Street at the time. And that meant that they had special privileges and so on. There's your waiting station without a car, but that's all right, that's fair enough. Okay, we're going on, approaching Revere Street, and the house is still there, and it's not, pretty much the same, except there's no car tracks. And then we move on to the Bayview Fire Station. This is a wide spot in the road now. The fire station is up here on the right, and the school is gone. It's now an apartment house. But that was the fire station and the passing track. This is looking down the hill to the where the car track, the streetcar crossed the Granite Company as they were going out to the pier on the left. There were two crossings there. At one point they had two tracks that
You're gonna
crossed.
see the steeple of the blue steeple church in the background there.
And again, the buildings are the same, except the big shed is gone. That's a big vacant lot there at the Lobster Company, or what was the Lobster Company. And we can go on. All right, Plum Cove Beach to the right. The reason the trestle was built was that on occasions, on a real high tide or a storm surge, you might have salt water coming across the tracks. There was a brook that runs down through here, still does, and that may have been a reason for it. The interesting thing is that the trestle is a very simplified version of a trestle. It's only 2 posts at each spot to hold it instead of 4. And instead of having long ties with the timbers on the outside of the rails, they had the timbers between the tracks. Yeah, it was one of those ways of dealing with it. But that's where it was. And here's the picture of the curve going into downtown Lanesville. Notice the pole is missing off the car. That was standard procedure, and I don't know, Grandpa may very well have been one of the shovelers, because that was one of the things. He was a house painter, and in the wintertime there wasn't much work, so when it came by, that was a favorite thing to do. But the pole was in the car, and they could take it out and stick it in and bolt it down, and then off the car could go. But apparently there was a power failure, and she got stalled on the curb.
Was the power AC or DC?
This is DC power.
600 volts DC.
Yep. All right, here again, this is in the center of the village looking west, and this is one of the double truck spliced cars that is on its way to the Folly. Or it could be around the Cape.
That's inbound, I think.
Yeah,
You notice the pole is up.
Yeah.
That car is headed.
It's headed towards
down-
Gloucester.
Down to Gloucester.
You got better eyes than I have. I don't even see a pole on it.
Yeah.
That's all right. 6 of one, half dozen the other. They ran both ways on this track.
I saw it before.
Okay. I'll defer to my brother. Okay, this car is sitting on the siding at Folly Cove. It's a double truck open car. 2-man, motorman and conductor. You can see the conductor standing in the rear. Motorman is at the controls.
Paul, is this near where the Lobster Pool restaurant is?
Yes, it's on the curve on the Rockport side.
Is
But
this
it
car facing downtown Gloucester?
He is heading for Gloucester, yes. And this may very well have been the layover point. That's immaterial. It ran all the way around the Cape. These two are on Langsford Street on the passing track, and you've got two of the cars that are perpetually remembered in a picture form.
I think it's notable also the long coats that they wore. There was no heat in the vestibules of these cars. So in the middle of the winter, they were, except for the doors being closed, they had no heat out there. The people inside may have had some heat.
Oh, yeah.
Because they paid a fare, but the motormen didn't have any heat. So they had long coats, and of course they had to go outside as well for switching and that sort of thing.
It was rugged time. As a matter of fact, it took them a number of years before they put windows on the front end of the car. The motormen originally were out the window without any protection. It took quite a come down for them to put windows on the front of the car.
Where were these cars likely to have been built?
What?
Where were they likely to have been built, these cars?
Okay, there were companies all over the country that built them. One of the favorites was in Worcester. Then Springfield had a builder, and there were others all over the country where they were. It was a big business.
Yeah, they built them in Newburyport as well, Newburyport Car
Yeah,
Company.
right.
So in the early days, many different companies, little companies that built streetcars.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
the streetcars outlasted the companies that built them. And, you built the cars and they were in service and they wouldn't wear out. They built them very well and they would go for years. We own one that's pushing 100 years old, former Boston car, and it's had its days. All right, this is the Long Beach trestle, and if you'll notice, the pilings under the trestle, only 2 for each set. That is kind of the minimum they could get away with. They weren't planning on having great big cars. The little 4-wheelers were standard procedure on that. They would run more than one. They'd run up to 3 of them.
Paul, you said this is the line to Long Beach. Is this picture actually taken at Good Harbor Beach?
That's right.
Okay.
This is right in the parking lot.
Parking lot.
And as a matter of fact, at least you could, we walked it into the marsh and you could find the holes where the pilings were. And in some cases, the pilings at that time were still there. But the holes are still in the marsh. But this was a summertime only run. Half-mile long trestle. From the end of Bass Avenue, curved and across the marsh, and then Briar Neck and out to Long Beach. And here's Long Beach and the pavilion and the trolley lined up, and I think this one has the bass drum on the back platform of the open car. But they brought their band with them.
Is that building near where the motel is today?
I guess so. I don't know. That's what was the old hotel. That's gone. But what's there now, I don't know. I haven't bothered to go down there. I suppose I should. And here's the other end, and 2 of the cars coming into Bass Avenue. And you can see the length of the curvature of the trestle all the way over to Briar Neck. And here we have motorman and conductor down into Foley.
How do you know it's the Foley?
Hmm?
How do you know it's the Foley?
Well, that's where the double track would be, and that's the likely spot where they would be standing around waiting for time. They were on schedule, and hey, somebody was going to take their pictures, so there they are. And here's the crew sitting on the side of a car, I have no idea who they are, but an interesting crew.
Maybe related to some of them, who knows?
You do, if you go through the collection of photographs, you do pick up some of the individuals, you see them over and over again. But they had a bunch of, I presume, they were students that were available in the summertime to cover the service. Oops, oh, come on. That's, now, let's. Okay, this is one of the buses that replaced the streetcar in 1920.
Wow.
And to the rear, you will see the trestle that existed out to the pier at Folly Cove. The posts are still there, the stone posts, but the trestle is long gone. But that is one of the buses. I guess they were kind of a hard riding deal. I believe a bus like this ended up the side of the road at going out to the Folly Point Reservation, off to the side in the woods there, or in the ditch. It had been abandoned, but you could tell by the windows that that's what it was. Rather interesting.
And this bus driver's name was Duchesne,
Yeah, Al Duchesne.
so if anybody's related.
And this is what happened to them. When the company quit, they figured, oh well, they'll want us back. And so they just left their older cars in the car barn, and it sat there, and the city never decided they would go back. And finally, the building was sold, and well, let's get rid of the bodies, and they were hauled off. This one probably went to the scrap pit at yeah.
Paul, did you explain to everyone that the building that the cars were kept in, the car barn in Gloucester, still stands? It's where White Hen Pantry and
Yes,
Midas
that is
Smuggler's
the
shop
building, and if you look at it from the downtown Gloucester end, you will see a date, or there used to be a date, 1898 on it. If you look at the building from an architectural standpoint, you'll notice that the downtown Gloucester end has a pitch roof, whereas the Long Beach end has steps in the brickwork. The building was built with those steps on both ends. But in 1898, the building had just been completed when the Portland gale came roaring through and took the roof off the building and took that end of it off with it. And they didn't have insurance on it, and didn't have enough money to actually build the building back the way it was, so they just put the roof on as to cover the cars up. Yes?
Did any of these end up at that Seashore Trolley Museum in Maine?
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay, I've been there a number of years ago, and I don't remember.
None of the Gloucester cars exist except for one, and you'll see it in a minute.
Okay.
Now, this is not one that exists. This one ended up at the top of the hill in Dogtown.
Mr. Vivian.
Vivian Estate. It was a shed up there, and it was there for a number of years, and then it just deteriorated, the vandals tore it apart, and that was the end of it.
Wow.
But that's what they did. You wanted it, hey, take it away, get rid of it.
So what, you also would note that they removed all of the electrical equipment from it, all of the heavy metal, the wheels, the trucks, the motors, and it was basically just wooden bodies that were sold or taken away. No wheels under these or anything. That's
But it's in the most inopportune spot that you could find. It's on top of the hill on the way to the what is now the transfer station in the dump. I mean, it's...
Can you talk about why the buses took over? Was it economic or technical? What were the reasons?
They decided that the streetcars were terribly expensive, and the company was in bankruptcy.
The makers of the cars, or was it bankruptcy?
The company that owned the cars, owned the lines, was in bankruptcy. And they approached the cities and towns and said, well, look, you want us to run, of course. Subsidize us. We need so much money to keep running. And the city of Gloucester said, who cares? We're not going to pay for you to run the trolleys. We can do without them. And they just simply, they had fancy new cars that were put on for, they had a half a dozen of them that they assigned, and that didn't make any difference. The town said, no, we don't want it. And on 21st of June 1920, the last streetcar ran, and they never pushed another one on the anywhere near. But
Paul, going along with that story, the trolley cars disappeared all over America because the trolley cars were private companies with employees that they had to pay. They had to maintain their routes, they had to maintain the infrastructure, they had to maintain the power plants. The buses came along and all they had to pay was the bus driver, and someone else plowed the road, maintained the road. The whole infrastructure was gone, even though the streetcar system. The best example in America is the city of Los Angeles. Los Angeles once had the world's largest streetcar company, the Pacific Electric Company. They had 800 miles of track in the county of Los Angeles, and they operated 3,000 streetcars just like this per day. And in 1930, General Motors and Goodyear Tire and Rubber, in a private deal with the mayor of the city, said, if you you take our buses, you won't have to pay the Pacific Electric. And eventually, between 1930 and 1950, Pacific Electric was abandoned. Today, Los Angeles is so densely populated that they realized they needed a streetcar system again to build the 14 miles of track from Long Beach, the port of Long Beach, to downtown LA, 14 miles. It cost $2 billion because of all the infrastructure they had to move, the sewer, the water, the pipes, the electric, the buildings, the structures. And yet, once they had the world's largest system, there are cities all over America that are going back and putting these streetcar systems in because they recognize the value. Once they're built, they're not emitting any fumes.
there's
And let's not forget that also in California, it was the oil companies who also lobbied to get rid of the tracks, so they would have the market for their product,
for their fuel,
gasoline, right.
a correction. The bus company, Gloucester Auto Bus Company, took over from the streetcars, and they had to plow the streets where the buses ran for a number of years. You have a snowstorm, and when the bus was due to come by, a plow came first, and the bus was right behind it. And they did that for a number of years until finally they got rid of it and gave it over to the city because, well, we can't afford to do this. And so the city took over the plowing, and that's what we have today. But that's how it went. Let's see, we have, okay, that is the only Gloucester streetcar in existence. It started out as a snowplow, that's why the funny front end. And later it was converted into an overhead line car for working on the overhead wires. This was the new line car. And it was assigned here in Gloucester until the end of service, and then it went up to Haverhill, where it worked for the Eastern Mass until it was eventually picked up by the Trolley Museum and was one of their earliest acquisitions. And there it is. That's the only Gloucester car in existence. Not a very fancy piece of equipment, but that's it. And I believe that's it. Come on.
It doesn't want to go.
No more.
But that's the sum and substance of it. There are a couple of models on the back table, and there's a book of photos, and if you have questions, I will fill you in. We've got an expert that's been doing it. Yes?
I have a question. Can you talk about what the streetcars did to the economy of the Cape when they first started running?
Well, this was what built the Cape up. There were 4 companies that worked here. There was there was the Gloucester Street Railway, which is the oldest. There was the Gloucester and Rockport Street Railway, which built the connection from Eastern Avenue through Rockport. There was the Gloucester, Essex, and Beverly, which built the connection up to Beverly and Eastern Mass and the rest of the world. And by the way, you could get on the streetcar where it ran here on the Cape, and with the proper transfers, you could travel with a I think it was a 2-mile gap, which you could take a train to cover it. You could go all the way to Des Moines, Iowa by streetcar. And
That
you
was the
could
gap
also
between
take
North Station and South Station out there.
you could go from here, you could go up to Lewiston, Maine by streetcar. Yes.
How fast would these cars go around the Cape?
Oh, about 10, 15 miles an hour. They were not terribly fast. They were a lot smoother than the dirt roads, though. That was the big deal.
How much did it cost? Or, you know, I'm just.
Basically, fare was a nickel. 5 cents.
To ride all around?
And then it went up to 6 cents, and it raised merry hell with the community. We're gonna pay an extra penny to ride? Oh, we can't do that. And then see where it's gone.
A question about how fast they went. The last surviving electric street railway that went between towns still exists today. The Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend runs from South Bend, Indiana to Chicago, 90 miles. And it's a very heavily patronized commuter railroad today. It's still electric and running through this Michigan City, Indiana. For 2 miles, it runs down the main drag through the city. And those cars in between towns go 90 miles an hour. And they've been going 90 miles an hour for probably 70 or 80 years. But it's a very heavily patronized route. And once that type of system, they were called interurban railroads. They ran between all major cities and towns and many rural communities. But the last one left that's still electric and still runs through the downtown areas out there is the Chicago, South Shore, and South Bend Electric Railway.
Don't forget Philadelphia and Western,
Well, there's many cities that
which
have streetcar
runs
systems
from
today, yeah.
69th Street Station in Philadelphia out to Norristown. And that is third rail, and it is a fast operation.
Would you introduce yourself there?
My name is Alan McMillan. I'm a retired locomotive engineer, and I'm the guy that talked Paul into putting on this performance. I live here in Annisquam.
And my brother on the other end.
David is the one that got all these into a digital format for Paul. But those of you who might enjoy this, there's an album back here. Paul actually has over 100 photographs of the streetcars of Cape Ann.
And the date they started up?
It was about 1880, 1882, somewhere in there, when the horse cars started. And it was a horse-operated car line, not necessarily exactly where the streetcars ran. For example, they ran on Pleasant Street. They also ran on Prospect Street. The horse cars did. They never electrified because there wasn't really enough demand to do that, and they ran on Main Street specifically. But Grandma if it was cheaper to do it, would ride to Boston on the streetcar. It was cheaper than going by train.
How long would
Took
it
longer.
That was from Arlington.
No,
What, from,
this is Grandma Tucker from Gloucester. Would ride to Boston on the streetcar and back. Sorry, little brother.
In terms of the time, Paul, the man asked how long did it take? It took a lot longer on the trolley because the Boston and Maine ran from Gloucester to Beverly, Salem to Lynn to Boston, pretty much a straight line. The streetcar meandered down Western Ave all the way to the center of Essex, and then down Martin Street to a place called Essex Junction. And there used to be, those of you who remember the old Junction ice cream stand? The line split there with one line, the line to the left went to Beverly down Route 22, and the line to the right went down Candlewood Road to Ipswich, and then through Ipswich to Rowley to Byfield, Georgetown, up to Newburyport.
And to Haverhill.
If you took the streetcar, it was vastly cheaper, but probably took 4 or 5 times as long as taking the train because it stopped everywhere. If someone stood out by the side of the road, they stopped to pick them up, essentially.
Yeah. There were parlor cars. Gloucester had 2 parlor cars, twins. The Magnolia and the Essex, and there's a model of one out here, and those cars would have been able to be chartered to go on private parties, and one of the private parties would go up to Canopy Lake Park, which was built by the streetcar company. And when you drive into the parking lot at Canopy Lake Park, you are driving on the trolley right away. It went in and looped. So, there's a lot of things that are tied in with the car lines. Yes.
Wasn't the one went to like Centennial Grove in Essex too?
That was a spur track
Okay.
that came off of the main line on the way to Beverly, and it went into the lake for a summer tourist. And you could have a charter car that would go there.
Anything left of that area there? You think?
Nothing that you could really say is that they've rebuilt the roads and everything else. It did not follow what is the main road. It looped through a side street. But I've chased it down as best I could. I recall seeing them, they did a plumbing job in Hamilton, and coming up to the Junction ice cream, and in the process went along the side of the road, which was out of the traffic, and up comes the car tracks. The rails were still there, because when they got through, they just buried them. The question is, are any car tracks left on the Cape? I'm almost as sure as I'm sitting here. The car tracks still exist from Main Street to the railroad station on Washington Street. Double tracks, with the exception of from Joan of Arc statue down over the hill to Main Street. That was pulled up when they put the gas main in from out of town. They went along the curb to avoid impeding traffic. When they got to the Joan of Arc statue, they had to go out into the middle of the road, and whoops, there's the car tracks. I have a section of the rail that came from there. It's a little heavy to carry around. Any other comments, questions, or what have you? You know, it can go on and on.
Paul,
Yes.
one little thing, at the very top of that pole up there, almost out of the picture, these were called trolleys. And it comes from the end of that pole, there was a little metal fist that held a round wheel, and that wheel was called the trolley.
And that sits on the table right out
That's what's
here.
sitting on the table here. It's the thing that actually contacted the wire to pick up the current, and there's one sitting on the table. It was a little wheel that turned that made a direct contact with the overhead
It had a
wire.
copper center and a steel outside. That, I have the pole, except for the springs, which had long since deteriorated. But if the pole stayed out much longer outdoors, the wheel would have just been nothing but a couple of rims and the copper center. And so I very reluctantly sawed the end of the pole off. But I figured if I really wanted to make it back, I could get some pipe threads, and I could cut threads on the ends and put a coupling in there, put it back together, and if I wanted to. It hasn't been done yet.
But that did come from a Gloucester trolley.
That's right.
That's not, they were all over the country, this type of pole, but this particular one came from one of these bodies that was used as a tool shed.
At the Johnson
at
Quarry in Folly Cove.
Pigeon Cove,
Well,
yeah,
it's,
up in the hill. We
Yeah.
went up and it had been burned about
But-
2 weeks before we got there. And
but they just left it as it fell. And so was able to measure some of the stuff and get the actual measurements of the car
this
and
was
the rest
some
of it.
pieces
And
came, the metal pieces that weren't burned. One was a pole.
so, yes,
Why didn't they get electrocuted when they had to move the pole? Isn't there live?
you had a rope that was tied to the pole, and you handled the pole with the trolley rope.
Or you would
Pull it down.
pull it down with a rope.
And you disconnect the electrical connection, and then you could go up and take the pole off because the car had no power to it, unless that pole touched the wire.
Was the track the ground?
Yes.
An amusing little anecdote about this, we call these trolleys, Paul's been talking for an hour about trolleys. Those of you who've been to England, if you go to a grocery store, you don't push a grocery cart around the grocery store, you push a trolley around the grocery store. As Winston Churchill said, we are two countries divided by a common language.
If you ride a trolley in England, it's actually a tram.
The tram, right.
So, anyway, that's, yes,
Going back to the Seashore Trolley Museum.
yes.
It would be a great day trip for people who wanted to. And it's about, from here to Kennebunkport, because my friends live up that area, it's about 2 hours.
Yep.
It's just beyond Kennebunkport on the way to, I don't know. It's like
Biddeford,
north of
I
that.
believe it's to Biddeford,
yeah.
yes.
And they do have something set up where you can take a ride. I don't know if it's a train
You
or a
can ride
trolley.
it. You
So
can,
it's,
you
it's
can
not
ride
just
the cars
looking at
there, they
cars.
do it.
Okay, so.
But,
there's a lot of
I mean,
people
they've
there.
got 150 to 200 cars that they've got in various stages of disrepair and repair. And they do have some that are set up that you can ride and on the weekends and what have you when they're open.
It's not, yeah, I think it's more summer too.
Yeah, it's a summer. Well, they do have a Halloween deal in the fall for the kiddies.
Well, they're open weekends too.
Yeah.
Good weather. They have annual meeting coming up in April.
You know, when you get out of the subway, when you drive, the green line,
Some of the
trolley.
meetings.
No more questions?
Yeah.
I think
I
we
mean, I've
can
never
adjourn.
been to
Hey,
a trolley.
it's